All right, let's jump right in. When you think about the most powerful weapon in history, what pops into your head? A stealth bomber? A battleship? Maybe an aircraft carrier? Well, what if I told you the most decisive weapon might not be a weapon at all? What if it's the huge, unseen system that gets a single bullet, a single meal, and a single drop of fuel to the soldier on the front line? Today we're taking a look at that unseen engine of war, military logistics.
And there's really no better place to start than with this famous quote, often credited to Napoleon. It just cuts right to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? You can have the most elite soldiers, the most advanced gear, but if you can't feed them, if you can't supply them, an army is just a crowd of people. It's a fundamental truth that has shaped literally every single conflict in human history.
And that leads to the big question, right? What happens when those supply lines snap? When the food runs out, the water's gone, and there's no more ammo? Well, history is absolutely littered with the stories of powerful armies that weren't beaten by a better enemy. They were beaten by their own logistical collapse. This is the exact problem that logistics is designed to solve.
So what is military logistics exactly? At its core, it's the whole shebang, the art and science of planning and then actually carrying out the movement and maintenance of military forces. We're talking everything from building roads to baking bread, from shipping fuel to stocking spare parts. It's not the glorious part of war for sure, but as we're about to see, it is almost always the deciding factor between winning and total disaster.
Okay, let's wind the clock way, way back. For ancient commanders, the main logistical challenge was brutally simple, just keeping your soldiers alive. I mean, before you can even think about winning a battle, you have to get your army to the battle, fed and watered. This was the most primal problem of survival.
Now, Alexander the Great, he was an absolute master of this. He understood that logistics is all about trade-offs. His secret weapon for the incredible speed of his army was actually pretty simple. He banned most of the heavy, wheeled carts. Instead, he relied on pack animals, like mules. He was willing to sacrifice how much he could carry for raw speed, and that let him consistently outmaneuver his enemies.
And you can see the hard data behind that decision right here. An ox cart could carry almost 5 times more stuff than a pack mule, sure, but it moved at half the speed. For a guy like Alexander, whose entire strategy was built on lightning-fast strikes, the choice was a no-brainer. Doubling his speed was worth way more than the extra cargo.
So this number, 720,000, what on earth is that? Well, get this. That's how many liters of water a 60,000-man Roman army's animals needed every single day. Forget the soldiers for a second. Just keeping the pack animals and the supply train hydrated was a monumental task. It just shows you the sheer staggering scale of the challenge they were facing. And when it comes to the problem of scale, nobody, and I mean nobody, did it like the Romans. They didn't just conquer, they were master engineers. They standardized everything. Daily rations for soldiers, pack animals assigned to individual squads, and of course, they built an astonishing 90,000 kilometers of roads specifically to keep their supply trains rolling. But even they knew sea transport was king. It was cheaper to ship grain across the entire Mediterranean than it was to haul it just 80 kilometers down one of their amazing roads. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. As we get into the early modern period, the armies just keep getting bigger and bigger. We're talking tens of thousands swelling to hundreds of thousands. And that created a whole new crisis. The old method of just living off the land, which, let's be honest, just means plundering, it wasn't going to cut it anymore. Armies got too big to feed themselves on the march. A new system was desperately needed.
And this slide shows that shift perfectly. On one side, you have the total chaos of living off the land, where an army's path was basically decided by where it could find food, not by any grand strategy. But on the other side, you've got this brilliant innovation from the French, the magazine system. The idea was to set up pre-stocked supply depots, or magazines, and then use convoys for regular resupply. This was a game changer. For the first time, strategy could dictate movement, not the other way around.
And if you want a perfect example of this new system in action, look no further than the Duke of Marlborough. His famous march to the Danube in 1704, the one that led to the Battle of Blenheim, it wasn't just a strategic masterpiece, it was a logistical one. He had people arranging for supplies to be bought and delivered to key spots all along his route, so his army showed up fed, rested, and ready to go, while his enemies were just scrambling.
But what happens when that kind of planning fails?
The great military thinker Karl von Clausewitz put it perfectly when he was looking back at Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. A supply line through friendly, developed country, that's one thing. But a supply line stretching for hundreds and hundreds of miles through a hostile, empty landscape, that's a whole different beast. Napoleon's huge army wasn't really destroyed by the Russians. It was destroyed by the Russian winter and a logistical failure of epic proportions.
The 19th century pushes us into the industrial age, and that brings a brand new problem. Now it wasn't just about feeding the soldiers, now it was about feeding the guns. The industrial war machine had this insatiable appetite for bullets, shells, and supplies that would change logistics forever.
And technology started offering some pretty incredible solutions. All of a sudden, you could preserve food in cans. You could ship fresh meat in refrigerated ships. You could move entire armies and all their stuff at unbelievable speeds by railway. I mean, each one of these inventions was a total revolution, completely changing what was even possible in a military campaign.
But the scale of World War I was it's mind-boggling. Just look at this chart. The British shipped over 5 million tons of ammunition to France, a crazy amount. But now look at the second bar. They shipped even more than that in hay and oats, just to feed the millions of horses that were still the backbone of their transport system. Let that sink in. It was a war fought with machine guns, but it was still supplied at the speed of a horse.
And that right there was the central crisis of the war. Armies had industrialized their ability to kill, right? You had machine guns and artillery that could just devour shells and bullets at a terrifying rate. But their supply systems, they were basically stuck in the 19th century, still relying on horses and a few railways. The result was this massive logistical bottleneck that led directly to the stalemate and the horror of trench warfare. Okay, that brings us into the modern age, which is defined by a totally new problem: complexity. Technology, especially from World War II and onwards, it created all these amazing new solutions. Yeah, but it also created weapons and equipment that were exponentially more complicated, needing these vast, intricate supply chains just to keep them running.
World War II was just this incredible hotbed of logistical innovation. And sometimes the best solutions were brilliantly simple, like the German-designed jerry can. It was so good, so practical, the Allies just straight up copied it. Other times they were transformative, like the amphibious landing craft that let the Allies unload supplies directly onto the beaches at Normandy. And sometimes they were just industrial miracles, like building a massive synthetic rubber industry pretty much from scratch when the natural supply was cut off.
And this chart, wow, this really shows you the result of that growing complexity. To put this into perspective, back in World War I, about 39% of the U.S. Army was in a logistics role. By the time of the Iraq War, that number had jumped to an incredible 55%. More than half the Army wasn't there to fight. They were there to support the fighters. The tail that supports the teeth of the Army had just grown immensely.
And here's a perfect snapshot of why that is. A modern M1 Abrams tank is an amazing piece of machinery, but it guzzles 3 times the fuel of the older M60 tank it replaced, and it needs 20% more spare parts to keep it running. So you see, every time we make a leap forward in technology, we also create this huge new logistical headache to go along with it.
So where does that leave us today? Well, modern military logistics has borrowed a ton from the commercial world. Things like containerization, even ideas like just-in-time delivery. It relies heavily on massive airlift capabilities and, increasingly, on civilian contractors to manage these global supply chains. And what's really interesting is that these incredible capabilities are now being used not just for war, but for humanitarian aid and disaster relief, getting supplies to people after earthquakes and tsunamis.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty big thought. As warfare gets more and more automated, more networked, and totally dependent on these super complex high-tech systems, have we reached a point where the supply chain itself has become the main battlefield? Is it possible that the next major conflict won't be won by soldiers with rifles, but by logistics, by data analysts, and by the resilience of their global supply network? It's really something to think about, isn't it?